Graeme Macdonald, CEO of JCB. Great to have you back on Money Talks. A year ago it was, you and I sat down. I asked you, we were sitting in your Staffordshire global JCB headquarters. I asked you, Graeme Macdonald, what is the biggest issue facing business now? You said in a flash, inflation. Then you sounded like an outlier. How right you were.
I can't believe it's been a year already, but what a year. It's amazing the geopolitical events that's happened and the impact on business. And you're right. I'm no economist. I was just reflecting on what I was seeing in our business at that time. We were seeing significant on costs on nearly every commodity coming into the business, on shipping costs, on nearly every input cost that we have. And obviously that's now flown through, and you see that in the inflation numbers and the cost of living crisis that everyone's facing. And we're still seeing some of that. Inflation, as you know, is a relative measure. It's a basket of goods. Today's costs compared to where 12 months ago. For example, steel. This time last year, I was telling you, I think steel was around about 1,200 euros a ton, up from 400 euros a ton the year before. Now that has softened off, but it's softened off to about 800, 750, 800. So it's still double the cost it was 2 years ago, but compared to this time last year, it's come off. So you've got to look at, obviously, if it's going to be a comparator of a year ago, I would expect inflation to carry on probably for another 2 quarters, and then probably in second, third quarter next year to come down rapidly. And in some cases, we're coming off a peak from 12 months ago. We might see deflation in certain countries. I'm sure that's bound to happen because
with prices actually going down.
Yeah, I mean, there are some exceptions to that. Energy is one, obviously. I mean, the cost of energy for a business like ours, we don't have any type of energy cap. So we pay market price, but we do forward contracts. And it's very interesting looking at that market. Right now we have a contract that's expired where we're paying roughly £112 per megawatt hour for electricity. The spot market today is £750 per megawatt hour.
Right.
So it's 700% increase. Now, if I buy forward today for this winter coming of winter 22, it's around about that price, £700. If you buy forward for summer next year, it's down at £450. If you buy winter 23, it's down again at 3. So the forward contracts are actually showing some pressures coming off energy costs. And who knows what other major geopolitical issues may happen in the world that might drive other events and other.
The thing is, Graeme, and it's worth stressing, that conversation that we had a year ago, September 2021, that was months and months before the war in Ukraine. So all those inflationary pressures were in the pipeline before the war in Ukraine, largely as a result of lockdown. Isn't that the case? It was a kind of cost of lockdown inflation at that point.
It was, and what we saw back then, it seems a long time ago when you think about it in that context, that during the COVID lockdowns in many industries, capacity was shut down, be it microchip capacity, be it in energy capacity, and logistics and shipping capacity. And when we came out of COVID in late 21, before the war, and even that has kind of continued, a lot of markets rebounded very quickly, and that demand outstripped supply very quickly in many supply chains. And the laws of supply and demand, the way these suppliers, they put the prices up very rapidly, and that's what we saw coming out of COVID. And then the shock of what happened earlier this year with the war in Ukraine is just, added huge economic pressure on those input costs.
Let's focus on the impact of that economic war, if you like, between East and West, a kind of implication of the war between Russia and Ukraine. How did it impact JCB? To what extent did you see your cost base increase? To what extent did you see, or did you see your order book collapse in the way that it did as you went into lockdown?
Yeah, we didn't see an immediate impact on our cost base because those costs were already escalating at that point anyway. We probably saw a spike certainly in oil and gas. But from a market demand point of view, I mean, one thing that we were proud of, and we were proud up until a year ago, was we were market leaders in Russia. So Russia was a big market for JCB. We had a small manufacturing unit there. Obviously, we stopped all trading immediately. We suspended everything while we worked out what on earth was going on, both legally, could you trade, and ethically, should we trade? And we made a decision that we shouldn't. So we've completely withdrawn from the Russian market. And that was, a big contributor to our volume. So we had to rip out a lot of orders that we had planned for the business and reallocate them around the world.
So what's the share of your sales were in Russia, Graeme, if I may ask?
Oh, it was less than 10%, but it's still, approaching 10%. So it's
Wow.
still, what we have seen is, and we've got a very, very good dealer in Ukraine. And right through the initial phase of the conflict, and now there's a huge amount of money flowing into Ukraine to rebuild. And we're right at the forefront of that. And we're working with our dealer, with UK Export Finance, a department of the Treasury, to help fund the machines. And that business
is that for both agriculture and construction purposes?
Absolutely both. Yeah, and yeah, absolutely both. And the Ukrainian government are actually an end customer, are as a lot of NGOs as well, who are setting up, helping rebuilding infrastructure in Ukraine. So we're very much part of that effort, which we're very proud of. But the fundamental underlying requirement for infrastructure is still there in nearly every country worldwide. So that drives demand for our equipment. As I said earlier, 25% of our business is agriculture, and that's actually very strong in the back of Ukraine, because Ukraine was one of the bread baskets of the world in terms of food production. So that's put huge demand elsewhere in the world for food production. We're seeing now, on the back of inflation and especially interest rate rises, pressure and confidence level on our customers in the UK and Europe. Can they afford to invest in equipment? Should they? Because a lot of it's financed. With interest rates going up, their payments go up. So we're seeing a bit of a slowdown in mainland Europe and in the UK, but it's coming off a record high market. So in historical terms, the market's still strong. India, we're a major player in India. India hasn't bounced back as we expected. Again, huge requirement for infrastructure, but they're a net importer of oil and gas. And obviously that's put huge fiscal strain on their purses to be able to free up, let's take a huge amount of their budget rather than investing in the infrastructure. So we're not seeing the money flowing into these big projects that were promised. It's still going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So we're still very confident. And North America, which has been a very strong success for us this year, self-sufficient in energy, that is a powerhouse of an economy. It's still going on. They've obviously announced many infrastructure bills there. And again, we'll grow over 60% in the US this year versus last year. So that's driving a big part of our growth. And we'll end up having a very strong year again this year.
GB News viewers and listeners will know JCB. It's a very proudly British company with your roots deep into the Staffordshire soil, where your global headquarters still is. Of your 22 factories around the world, half are in the UK, half are abroad. That gives you, as the CEO of JCB, a really good sense, in my view, of where the global economy is going. Graeme, it's a worrying time. What do you think the world economy is going to look like this time next year? It's a really tough question, but it will certainly be a question that's in the back of your mind each and every day as you control and drive forward this astonishing British but global company.
Look, I'm not an economist, as I said, but all I can look at.
You're pretty good at forecasting for a maybe that's why you are so good at forecasting, because you're not an economist.
maybe so, but I look at all the inputs that come to me in terms of input costs and market trend data, and we look at the short term. And our industry is a bellwether for the economy. A lot of governments investing in infrastructure. One of the first parts of spend is on equipment before they even start the project. So it's a good lead indicator for economic activity. And I think I've said to you before, I see long term, with population growth, with urbanization, which is happening in nearly every country in the world, especially in developing countries, that the requirement for economic activity to drive that will remain strong. There will be bumps along the road, and don't get me wrong, I'm not underplaying what happened earlier this year, but there are always economic, geopolitical shocks that happen, and you can never predict them. But if you drew a line over the last 40 or 50 years of our market, not our but our market, it's a straight line up. There is cyclical. There are ups and downs, be it in the 08-09 financial crisis, be it with COVID in 2020. There are big dips, but it comes back even stronger the next upturn. So, look, in the next 12 months, I think one of the big threats right now, I've given my view on inflation, but it depends what governments do with interest rates. I think that could slow down investment rapidly if they push to, and I understand why they're doing it, but I think it's maybe an overreaction. So I think if interest rates go too high, then that could be a dampener on the economy and the world economy, not just the UK.
Now, JCB, it's a grand old name, 77 years old, I believe, this year. But you are always innovating, particularly in the field of hydrogen energy, a huge interest of Anthony Bamford, Lord Bamford, your long-standing chairman, the son of the original founder, Joseph Cyril Bamford. Where are JCB at with hydrogen now? You've obviously got these hydrogen prototypes that we've shown here on GBNews in the past, emitting only water, using electrolysis to create that hydrogen. How near are they now to commercial rollout, Graeme?
They are definitely getting nearer. I can't give away all our trade secrets, but it's 12 months since we talked, and we did have machines running about then. We've got a lot more machines running about now with the hydrogen engine in it. We're expanding our smaller range of compact equipment with battery electric solution as well, and that's going very well. But hydrogen is going to play a major part in our future, and it's interesting. I think what's happened the last 12 months, not just in our own development of our own engine and application, but is the adoption of hydrogen as an alternative to batteries. There's much more discussion in media, just general media, in automotive media, in trade press. So the whole idea of hydrogen as a source of power and hydrogen combustion engines is much more credible than it was 12 months ago, and we're pushing on, and it's going to be in the medium term horizon. Let's put it that way.
It is. We've talked a lot about hydrogen here on GBNews, Graeme. It's been one of the sort of drums that I've personally been banging. I agree with you, with JCB senior executives. It very much is a very promising fuel of the future. I sense though that our policymakers still don't really get it. Would you like to see more interest from the government in hydrogen, a more enabling environment, more tax incentives perhaps? In the end, isn't hydrogen the long-term answer rather than electric vehicles which rely on rare earths, lithium, very heavy batteries that in the end are quite energy inefficient?
Oh, certainly for our application, absolutely, it's part of it. And the answer is yes to all of your above points. Of course, the UK government needs to be far more serious about it. And obviously, there's a lot of turbulence in UK politics right now. And when you look at the likes of France, the likes of Germany, even the US, they have a far more coherent and joined up hydrogen policy than the UK government do. So I think what's going to inhibit the adoption of hydrogen is not the technology in the machines or the cars. It'll be the investment in infrastructure of getting it to the user.
And that's partly down to the government.
Well, it's going to be, it's going to drive the investment. It's going to attract investment, private investment, and it's going to make sure it's incentivized and there is a hydrogen hub in every region. And we've got to be thinking much more strategic.
What should the government do and say in the next few months in order to really up our hydrogen game, matching what our private sector are doing? It's not just JCB. There are many UK companies at the cutting edge of this technology, aren't there?
I think the government have got to decide. They've got to make somebody or at least one ministry accountable for the hydrogen strategy. Right now, it seems to fall between the Ministry for Transport and BEIS. And so when you're talking to not just the ministers, it's the civil servants, the the people who are actually writing the policy, they've got to decide who's accountable for it and have a very clear vision of where they're going. And hopefully the incoming Prime Minister will have that vision and clear, understanding of what hydrogen can do and the potential it can unlock for the country. It's not just about JCB. I mean, I genuinely mean, as you said, it's a far more from cradle to grave sustainable solution than battery electric. Far more.
Wow.
The measure of the battery electric is always at the tailpipe, and at the tailpipe of anything, it will be zero emissions. But there's a whole supply chain involved with all this technology, and that's really what's going to be understood. And that should be what's in the buying decision of end consumers and our customers, is that whole supply chain and what that carbon footprint is and what the cost is and what the long-term implications are.
Finally, Graeme, you're sitting at the apex of a world-class company. You've made a profit every single year of your company's existence. You've got an incredibly strong balance sheet, intellectual property, global reputation that's second to none. How optimistic can we be going forward? How optimistic are you that Britain can get out of what a lot of our people feel now is a quite a serious economic predicament?
I think long term, you've got to be optimistic. We're well positioned as a trading nation. We're an island nation. We've got great expertise, great engineering skills, fantastic education system. I think we talked last year about, encouraging the STEM subjects right at the grassroots of education in the schools, to get far more girls and boys through that education system into then engineering and everything else. So I think we're very well placed as a country. We should stop putting ourselves down. The threats that we face, every other country faces. I mean, it is fascinating because we compete, as you know, on a global basis, and we compete against the Japanese and the Koreans and the Chinese and Japan and Korea right now. Their inflation is low single digits. So it is, so they have the same input costs as us, but one of the pressures we'll face and we are facing is on labour costs with high inflation. Whereas in a low inflation environment, you don't have as much pressure. But going back to your question, I think we should stop talking the UK down. The UK as a manufacturing economy is still significant as a global player. We have great skills, great knowledge, great history. And it's always interesting when we set up new factories, and we've done another couple of factories recently, one in India. We're looking at other investments elsewhere in the world. We always typically take our best people from the UK and transplant them there because the skills of our type of manufacturing don't necessarily exist in other parts of the world. And, we train very young kids coming out of schools and colleges and get them up there. But
coming out of the JCB Academy, indeed.
I can see it from here, right across from my office out the window here. That's a fantastic source of talent.
Graeme Macdonald, CEO of JCB, thanks a lot for appearing once again on Money Talks.
Thank you, Liam.